Adolf Hitler, once seen as an aggressive and domineering force and one of the greatest dictators of recent history, would meet his downfall in a gloomy, damp bunker as the war drew to its close. Germany now lay open to invasion. Allied planes rained bombs on Berlin, and its people were forced to take shelter in basements and bunkers. In truth, Hitler had never stayed in one place for very long throughout his rule, and outside Berlin he had used nearly 20 different headquarters. Among these, the ones where he spent the most time were the Berghof in Bavaria and the Wolfschanze, the Wolf's Lair, in East Prussia. During the final stage of the war, particularly in the second half of 1944, he spent much of his time at the Adlerhorst, the Eagle's Nest, in Hesse. But after the failure of the Ardennes offensive and Operation Nordwind, he returned to Berlin on January 16, 1945, with a staff of 30. Though he could have settled into his apartment on the upper floor of the Reich Chancellery, his official residence, he chose instead the Führer bunker, built roughly 10 meters beneath the garden. The shelter's foundations had actually been laid back in 1936 during the Berlin Olympics as protection against air raids. As the war progressed, it was expanded into its final form. Beneath a concrete ceiling 3 meters thick lay a long corridor lined with 30 rooms. 3 of these were reserved specifically for Hitler and his mistress, Eva Braun, a sitting room, separate bedrooms, and a study. In addition, there were a map room, a briefing room, and waiting areas. Contact with the outside world was maintained through a private telephone switchboard, a telex machine, a military radio set connected to an antenna that reached the surface, and personal couriers. In his first days in the bunker, Hitler mostly ate and slept, holding meetings with his senior commanders almost daily in the afternoons. The news kept getting worse. By early February, Soviet forces had reached the Oder River, just 70 kilometers from Berlin. German forces in Budapest had surrendered to the Allies, and Dresden had been reduced to rubble. In the west, meanwhile, American armored units were crossing the Rhine. In March, an operation launched to protect Hungary's oil fields ended in complete failure. Amid this collapse, Hitler's physical and mental health was deteriorating rapidly. Chief of the Army General Staff Heinz Guderian would later write that the left side of Hitler's body trembled, that he walked in a strange, heavy manner, stooping more than ever before. His movements had slowed, and when he wished to sit, someone had to hurry to bring a chair for him. His hands shook constantly. He shuffled his feet as he walked, and he looked far older than his years. He had grown increasingly dependent on the treatments administered by his physician, Theodor Morell, some of which had narcotic effects. On certain days he received as many as 20 injections. Though he claimed to feel invigorated after taking his medications, in reality his judgment was deteriorating by the day. His outbursts of rage grew more frequent, and he began accusing even his closest commanders of treachery. His furious dressing down of Guderian, who had proposed evacuating 200,000 soldiers trapped in Latvia, was only one example. The Nero Decree, which he issued in March, showed just how far things had spiraled. It ordered the destruction of all industrial facilities, transport and communication systems, military installations, and supply depots on German soil that might fall into enemy hands. By now Hitler wanted Germany itself to burn. Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments tasked with carrying it out, quietly ignored the order. Hitler would only learn of this a month and a half later, so thoroughly had his connection to the outside world been severed. In early April, news of the death of American President Roosevelt briefly kindled a glimmer of hope in the bunker. Perhaps the course of the war could still be reversed. But that hope was extinguished just a day later when the Red Army entered Vienna. Within a few days, Soviet forces would cross the Oder and begin advancing on Berlin. By now, Berlin was being bombed almost daily. From this point on, Hitler moved his meetings entirely into the bunker and began spending nearly the whole day there without ever going up. Life underground may have been safer than above, but it was every bit as merciless. because the bunker lay below the water table. Dampness was a serious problem. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, and the drone of the generators gave nearly everyone headaches. April 20th was Hitler's 56th birthday. That afternoon at 3 o'clock, he stepped outside the bunker for the last time. In the Chancellery garden, in a distinctly somber mood, he reluctantly accepted birthday greetings. Among his visitors that day was a delegation from the Hitler Youth, including boys who had already fought at the front. He awarded Iron Cross medals to these young men who had pledged to defend Berlin with their lives, and greeted each one personally. When he returned to the bunker, Eva Braun gave him a gift, a photograph inscribed, "To my Führer, from your faithful Eva." That same afternoon, a military briefing was held that was attended by Göring, Himmler, Goebbels, Speer, Ribbentrop, and Bormann. Most of those present urged him to abandon Berlin so the war could be directed from elsewhere. Another shelter in the Alps was even proposed. But Hitler categorically rejected the idea. Victory or death would come here, in Berlin. The moment the meeting ended, most of the attendees hastily left the besieged city. Hitler now seemed almost entirely alone. From this point on, his grip on reality slipped further away. He believed his army possessed a strength it no longer had, and in the briefing room he moved divisions and armies across the map that had long ceased to exist. He had ordered General Felix Steiner to wipe out the Soviet forces massing north of the city, but no such counterattack ever took place. On April 22nd, when he learned the order had not been carried out, he flew into a rage in front of everyone, blaming those around him one by one. The outburst lasted roughly 3 hours. When he finally calmed down, he admitted for the first time to those present that the war was lost, and announced that he would take his own life. Around this time, Eva Braun wrote to her closest friend, Hertha, making no secret of her despair. These, she wrote, were probably her last lines and her last sign of life. Her end was near, and she would die as she had lived. Hitler, meanwhile, was discussing methods of suicide with his physician. 2 further blows came on April 23rd. Göring sent a telegram stating that if he heard nothing from Hitler by 10 that night, he would be forced to assume leadership himself. Hitler took this as an act of betrayal, and further provoked by his secretary Bormann, ordered that Göring be stripped of all his posts and arrested. That same day, General Weidling was appointed to command the defense of Berlin, suddenly finding himself in charge of some 80,000 men trapped within the city, most of them Volkssturm militia and Hitler Youth members. As fighting intensified in the streets above, life in the bunker grew ever more cramped. The arrival of Goebbels' wife and their 6 children only made the overcrowding worse. On the evening of April 28th came disappointment from one of the men Hitler trusted most. The BBC announced that Himmler had secretly opened peace negotiations with the Allies. Enraged once again, this time by the betrayal of the man he had nicknamed the Loyal Heinrich, Hitler ordered his arrest for treason. The next morning, April 29th, he married Eva Braun, his companion of nearly 10 years, in a simple ceremony held in the map room. After the wedding breakfast, he dictated his will to his secretary. Rather than live with the shame of surrender, he stated he had chosen death together with his wife. He named Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor and Goebbels as chancellor, and specifically requested that both their bodies be burned after death. That same day, news reached the bunker that his ally Mussolini had been killed by Italian partisans, his body strung up by the feet and put on public display. Another blow for Hitler. The cyanide capsules prepared for the suicides were first tested on his dog, Blondie. The poison worked within seconds. On the afternoon of April 30th, word came that ammunition had run out and the city could no longer be defended. Hitler's final order was to allow those remaining in the bunker to leave the city if they wished. He then said his goodbyes to everyone in the bunker and withdrew with his wife into his private study. Soviet soldiers were, by then, only about 500 meters from the bunker. Around 3:30 p.m., Those who entered the room found that Eva had died from cyanide poisoning and Hitler from a gunshot. Both bodies were carried into the garden and burned. Hitler had specifically ordered this in his will, not wanting his corpse to be used for propaganda by the Allies. But the final act did not end there. Generals Wilhelm Burgdorf and Hans Krebs followed their leader's example and took their own lives. Hitler's valet, Heinz Linge, and his SS adjutant, Otto Günsche, were captured by the Red Army while attempting to escape. Stumpfegger, Bormann, Hans Bauer, and Arthur Axmann were also among the senior figures seized while trying to flee. The most tragic end of all, however, belonged to the Goebbels family. Joseph and Magda Goebbels, among Hitler's most fervent followers, believed a world without Nazism would not be worth living in, for themselves or for their children. Magda poisoned all 6 of their children. The couple were then shot in the garden. Goebbels, too, had asked that his body be burned like his leaders, but not enough fuel remained, and the corpses could not be fully destroyed. And so the Third Reich came to its end, together with its founder, in a damp, gloomy bunker meters beneath the ground. The wounds it had opened across the world perhaps never to fully heal.